The Steady State Sentinels, produced by the Steady State, a community of former national security professionals who spent their careers safeguarding the United States, at home and abroad.
Today, we continue that mission by staying true to our oaths to defend the Constitution,
uphold our democracy,
and protect our nation's security. Join our expert hosts as they interview field-tested guests whose unique experiences shed light on the crises and challenges facing our nation.
You're listening to the Steady State Sentinel from the Steady State. I'm John Cipher, a former officer of the CIA's clandestine service and the founder of Spycraft Entertainment. Our guest today on the Steady State podcast is Terry Virts. Terry is a retired astronaut, commander of the International Space Station, and an Air Force fighter pilot. He's now running for Congress in Texas's 9th Congressional District. He's also a friend. And for our new listeners, and for you, Terry, the Steady State is an organization made up of hundreds of former intelligence, military, law enforcement, and diplomatic personnel who seek to put country over party based on their oath to defend the Constitution. The group works to promote democracy and the rule of law via media outreach, articles, podcasts, blogs, and support to legal challenges. All right. Well, it's great to have you here, Terry. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. So, Terry, you studied at the Air Force Academy and in France. You served as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force, space shuttle pilot, and even flew on the Russian Soyuz space capsule to the International Space Station. And now you're running for Congress. So the notion of service must be important to you. How did your sense of service start, and how has it evolved?
Studying I did at the Air Force Academy. I existed at the Air Force Academy.
I don't believe it.
I have an interesting story. When I was a kid, we had an exchange student stay with my family, actually several from New Zealand and from Spain. And so I love foreign countries. I studied French when I was in middle school and high school, and it was just something I liked. In 8th grade, they said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be Secretary of State." So when I was 16 years old, I joined an organization called AFS, American Field Service. In World War I, they had been the American ambulance drivers, and it turned into this exchange student program for kids. And I went and lived in Finland, and I got this letter, and it said, "You're going to Finland." And I was like, "Cool, where's Finland?" So I ran inside. We had a family atlas, and I had to go to Finland, and figured out where that was. And so I lived there with a family, tried to learn the Finnish language, which is crazy, by the way. I think you and I have, we have some friends that's a crazy language. You were based there, weren't you?
Yeah, that was my first language I had to learn when I was in the service.
Oh
And
my God.
I was told year, and I remember looking out the window, like in Arlington, where I was taking Finnish language and saying, I can see more people in my field of vision here than there are in Finland altogether. But while I was suffering with that crazy language.
Mitä kuuluu?
Yeah, ei mitään.
So I lived with a family, and we lived on a lake in Imatra.
Mhm.
And on the other side of the lake was the Soviet Union. There was literally like a buoy in the middle of the lake, and there was a guard. So I was 16 years old, 1984. I could see Soviet tourists would come over, and they'd have to walk in a line, and they always had a handler. And I had read 1984 in high school. So all of this stuff really made an impression on my young teenage brain. And I agreed with Ronald Reagan. It was the evil empire. And so I joined the Air Force when I was 17, raised my right hand, swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So it's just been part of who I am. I always loved World War II history, and I kind of was shocked at Vietnam history. And so that's just been something I've always been interested in. And when I see what's happening today, it makes my head explode. I think your head probably is long since exploded. I'm just not willing to stand by and watch the Constitution go up in flames. Administration is trying to do so. I got tired of yelling at Twitter, and I decided to run for office.
Well, let's transition then a little bit, because that's not easy, right? So in the roles where you answered not to a political party, but to a mission, country, and a team, what lessons do you think you learned that will be applicable to elected public service? Can a politician operate above partisan politics, or at least maintain a sense of service?
And I think many do not. I
Yeah,
mean, they
wow.
should. Um, I think my personality has many flaws and defects, but one of them is if my tribe or if my team is doing something wrong, I'll call them out on that. For example, I'm running as a Democrat, but I'm very critical of the Democratic Party. I'm a Christian, but I'm pretty critical of what the quote unquote church is doing in many cases. Um, I, Personally, I don't have a problem with calling out my team when they do something wrong. And I think that's any healthy organization. If you have an organization of yes men that things are not going to go well, for example, I'd hate to be the guy in Russia. Job is to tell Vladimir Putin that things aren't going well in Ukraine, right?
I don't think they do tell
Uh,
them. I think
I-
that's the problem with a system like that.
yeah. And so what we need is more people who are willing to stand up and say, "Hey guys, Joe Biden's too old. Joe, it's time to not run for office." Right? If the Democratic Party would have had some cojones, uh, we wouldn't have President Trump today. We need Republican. Well, that's not going to happen. The Republican Party has been taken over, but what we need is guys like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney who are willing to stand up. America's in terrible need of brave leaders who put country over self and country over party. And unfortunately, in politics, what we have a lot of times is party over country.
Oh, as you meet with voters and you get out and do that thing that those of us who worked inside as public servants didn't do, how do you communicate to them the importance of this idea of country over party rather than just leaning into partisan shorthand? And separately, do you get pressured by the party to like try to, stick to their talking points?
So this journey I'm on right now began in the Senate. I started running for U.S. Senate 6 months ago. I was the first guy to announce. My basic premise, my theory of the case there was a Democrat hasn't won in Texas in over 30 years, right? Like Pearl Jam was at the top of the charts the last time a Democrat won here. And
That's a modern music phenomenon for me. So even older.
exactly. Well, and imagine so somebody with my background as a fighter pilot and astronaut, that might be interesting statewide. That's why I ran for Senate. The Senate race is very crowded right now, and I switched to House, which is great. But when I was running for Senate, there was a lot of pressure from the National Party insiders. Don't do that. Fall in line. Schumer's the guy, Now that I'm running for House, it was very refreshing. They're like, look, Terry, run against the Democratic Party. Bet you're running in Texas. We know that. You got to win. Bash us. We don't care. Just win. It was super refreshing to hear that. And I've heard that about Nancy Pelosi also. I never met her personally, but a lot of other candidates who ran in red states as Democrats, Nancy would always say, look, use me as your negative ad. I don't care. Bash me all you want. Just win. And that's the opinion that's the attitude I think that any leader needs to have. Like, do what you need to do, but win. Because that winning, if we don't start winning elections, we're not going to have any more elections. I think that day is rapidly approaching, much
And
faster than any of us would want.
you can be pure, but if you lose, it doesn't matter how pure
The
you are.
Democrats are so bad about purity tests. We need to just flush purity tests down the drain. And you know what works in New York City is not going to work here. The district I'm running in is a largely Latino refinery district and farmers. And so basically I have refinery, working class folks, shipping channel, working class folks, and agriculture, farmers and ranchers. These guys are not going to be voting for the things that gets Manhattan excited, but that's okay. What works there works there. What works in Texas works in Texas.
A little later on, I'll ask you, are there any sort of national security or foreign policy things that seem to resonate with voters? But first, let's go back a little bit into your career. Can you tell us a little bit about how, why you chose the Air Force, what it was like to be a fighter pilot, and how do you transition into being an astronaut?
When I was a kid, I lived in Maryland. I literally lived in the Naval Academy Congressional District. Um, and we had a boat on the Severn River in Chesapeake Bay. I spent my summers like riding up and down on the bay, crabbing and doing that stuff. And I remember I was sitting on the couch. My mom called and she said, "Terry, you're going to get one nomination from the Congress. Go to Air Force or Navy," because I'd applied to both. And I was like, I mean, Navy would have been really easy. My girlfriend was there when I was a teenager, and my family was there, and I was Air Force. And
Huh.
I wanted to go see the world, and I figured I want to be a pilot, and it's the Air Force, and I didn't want to be on a boat with 5,000 of my best friends for 6 months. So
There are golf courses in the Air Force too, I think.
Air Force, and I was at a campaign event this week, and there were some Navy guys, and they're like, "Oh my God, you guys have the officers' quarters are better, and the base housing is better, and the golf courses are better." There's a funny thing. When I was at NASA, we got Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. We got the whole thing there, and civilians. And I'm sure you've seen it. There's 100 variations, but there's a joke about there's an Army guy sitting there with a gun in a swamp, and he's like, "This place sucks." And then there's a special ops guy, there's a Marine, and he's like, "I love it how much this place sucks." And there's a special ops guy with a knife, and he's saying, "I wish this place sucked more." And there's an Air Force guy with his remote control and TV, and he's like, "Their cable TV's out. This place sucks." And like, truer words have never been spoken. I was always happy to be comfortable in my F-16 looking down. There might have been surface-to-air missiles coming at me, but at least I wasn't on the ground. So
Even Space Force is going to be even more cushy in the future.
Space Force, they're sitting there at their computer, sending commands to satellites. God bless the Army. God bless the Marines. I'll own it. I'm proud to be in the Air Force. I'll own that.
And then how do you you were a pilot and you flew missions and things and tell us a little bit about that. But then how did you transition into NASA and what that was that like?
Yeah, I flew F-16s for 11 years, basically. Around the world. I flew in. My operational bases were Florida, Georgia, Korea, Germany. And when I was in Germany, I spent a lot of time in Iraq. Uh, and it was
Part of it.
awesome. I was very lucky. My whole Air Force time was only doing operational tours. I never had to go do like in training command or do any of those other tours that nobody really wanted to do. Um, and then I became a test pilot, and then at test pilot school, NASA said they're going to have a class of new astronauts, and so I applied, and I was very fortunate. I got picked. I was the youngest pilot here at NASA, and then so I had 11 mailing addresses in 11 years in the Air Force, and then I've lived here for 25 years ever since I came to Houston. I've lived here way longer than I've lived anywhere.
And so tell us a little bit about what it's like to be an astronaut. Was that fundamentally different from being a pilot, a fighter
Oh
pilot?
yeah, very much. So as a fighter pilot, knuckle dragging fighter pilot, you wear your green bag, your green flight suit every day. You're around fighter pilots, so language is not necessarily suitable for work, and you're giving each other a hard time, and you're like, sometimes you die. Unfortunately, I have too many widows that I stay in touch with. So it's a dangerous job. It's a fighter pilots are pretty funny. Just ask us. So there's a certain culture. I'm sure in the agency there's a certain. And then at NASA, you have to be an adult, and all of a sudden you're wearing, I was wearing a polo shirt every day to work, and um, everybody was a civilian, and it was just it's a different universe. And it was awesome, and it was fine with me. I'm a pretty uh, I I was one of the better behaved guys in my squadron, so to say the least. I never did anything wrong. So when I came here, the transition wasn't that big, but it's definitely a different culture. And everybody at NASA is an engineer. What's weird in Air Force Space Command, which is now Space Force, there's only. I had a friend who was a 4-star commander. He was lamenting they only had like 10% engineers. Most of the people at Space Command, we used to call them basket weaving majors, like they weren't engineers. But at NASA, everybody is. Like you can't get a job at NASA unless you're some kind of technical science or engineer. So that was an interesting difference. And it's civilian, right? So we're launching billion space shuttle missions. We're building the International Space Station. We're flying with Russians, which I loved. I loved learning Russian. Spent a lot of time in Russia, which made the security people's head explode. You got to update your clearance every 5 years, and it was so funny. You have to write down all the countries you've been to. I'm like, guys, come on. And you go in for the interview, and they're like, have you talked to any international people? And I'm like, you mean this morning or this afternoon? So um
Like to feel for you there, but like the amount of polygraph crap that I had to put up with too.
yeah, well, I never had to do polygraph. So
Okay.
but yeah, so it was an interesting thing. I enjoyed the culture shift going in, but they were both awesome, very different organizations. But I was very blessed and lucky to have worked places.
The difference between being on a Russian, Soyuz capsule
Yeah,
or an American one, is it fundamentally different?
there's a lot of differences. So first of all, the Soyuz capsule is very small. You're in there crammed. It's basically the same capsule from the 60s. Uh, America actually paid for some upgrades, so they did get a little bit more modern displays and stuff, but it's basically the same thing. It's mostly automated. The commander, who's a Russian guy, sits in the middle, has some buttons he needs to push and some things he needs to do. But for the most part, it's automatic. The uh, they have a control stick, and the button to talk on the radio is there, but they basically said the control stick was just to give the cosmonauts the feeling that they were in control. It was like an emotional thing. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't control the but there's this, if you ever
Like on
if
a
you
ride at Disney
at
World, you
Disney
feel
World,
like
exactly, on the roller coaster, when you got the thing, it doesn't do anything. So it did have a button for the radio, and the commander had a trigger that could release the parachute. After you land, you have to release the parachute so you don't get drug across Kazakhstan. And so anyway, there were a lot of operational differences. It was the Soviet style. The Soviet pilots on their radio, like American, you dial in the frequency, UHF radio, 238.2, and you dial it in and you talk. That wasn't the way the Soviets were. They had pre-programmed the radio, so you couldn't call up, Frankfurt control and defect. That you only could talk on the Soviet channels, and that was kind of the working of the Soviet capsule, is just execute what they told you. Whereas on the space shuttle, you could type in manual anything you wanted to and make the vehicle do whatever you wanted. So that was always a difference in philosophy. The Soviet pilots and the American pilots, and that's why our pilots are so much better. Those guys were not, they didn't think, they just did what they were told. Why the Russian army sucks so bad. As cosmonauts, as American pilots, as American astronauts, and I'm sure in the agency, you do a mission, you have a debrief. And when you debrief, like, there's no rank, and there shouldn't be anyway. If the lieutenant did something good, he gets kudos. If the colonel screwed up, he hears about it, right? That's the way it should be, because you're not just there to stroke your ego. You're there to, like, get better the next time and hopefully not die. Like, that's the main goal. Whereas in Russia, we would do a simulator, this 2 or 4 hour big space simulation. And afterwards, the only purpose of the debrief was the cosmonauts fighting tooth and nail, not get blamed for anything. Because, like, in Russia, if you get blamed for something, you get shot or you get sent to Siberia. I mean, it's a century-long, horrendous culture that they have. They have a profound, bad culture. And I'm sure you know about that. Yeah.
we're seeing it on the battlefield. And you and I are in a signal chat with a bunch of people who are very focused on Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
And someone was talking Ukrainian was on there mentioning that he had been in Kursk, and he talked about how the North Korean troops were almost like 17th century France or something, just would stand up and walk across fields at them, and they felt awful. They would just mow them down, but they like robots. They do things one way. There's no thinking
So fun.
involved.
I
Yeah,
had, in the 90s, we had this thing called Partnership for Peace, trying to integrate former.
I remember.
Yeah. And I had a Hungarian pilot one time, MiG-29 pilot. First of all, I had bought this old 1984 BMW 7 Series, lead gas. I paid $3,000 for it when I showed up at the squadron, and 3.5 years later, I sold it for $3,000. And he was amazed at this beautiful big, he called it the boat. He was so amazed at my big car. I'm like, this thing's a junk. It's the squadron junker that we just hand down to the next guy. But I tried to put him in an F-16 simulator. He couldn't fly it. Like, he was unable to fly the thing, and it was really bizarre. I'm like, dude, I don't know. When I was 22 years old, when I first got in the F-16, I flew it just fine after about 3 seconds, and he was unable to fly the thing. And the West German Air Force integrated the East Germans when they all came down. Base called Laga. It was a MiG-29 base in the former East Germany. We used to go fight these guys, but what they found, every single East German fighter pilot that they tried to integrate into the Luftwaffe couldn't hack it. They literally had to take every single one of the East German pilots and put them in some kind of ground job, or just let them have a job so they could get a paycheck. None of them could hack Western fighter pilot standards.
That's a whole different mentality, but at least probably there was more vodka in the Russian Soyuz.
in the Soyuz.
Yeah.
Yeah. there was definitely in the space shuttle there was zero. So yes, anything greater than zero is greater than zero.
Well, let me ask you a little bit. So now, you're making the rounds in Texas
Yeah.
and you talk to young people and that are, hopefully get them excited and politics can actually be something positive. What advice do you give to young people, either ROTC cadets, people who want to go on the space program, or people who want to go into politics?
I mean, yeah, so my first advice I tell everybody, young people and old people, is don't tell yourself no. If there's I got a whole story I could tell about my career, but the bottom line is don't tell yourself no. If there's something you want to do, you have to go for it. If you tell yourself no, you're not going to get it. That's the first thing. Second thing is, service is super important. And you and I and other folks are always debating, do we tell people to go into this career of State Department, CIA, military, and in today's environment? My daughter just did a Fulbright program, which is, one of the top flagship programs for young people. It's the State Department. You go around the world, you either study or teach English. Got a big cohort in Slovakia. None of them are going to the Foreign Service. None of them are
Hmm.
joining the State generationally tragic. That's really bad for America's diplomatic corps for the future. But people are turned off by what's happening nowadays, and I get it. And we need you. Hopefully, knock on wood, in 2026 and 2028, we can start turn the battleship around. But
Your stories of Hungarians and East Germans and stuff makes sense at this time because in some ways this administration wants public servants and wants institutions to just do whatever they
it's
say and
good.
not
Yeah,
not come to them with advice and question things and that type of thing. And Americans want to be involved and they want their opinions to matter and they will follow along if it makes sense. But just to be told do this, do that, it's not in our character.
Texans. That's not Texans are not. Although John,
Uh-oh.
it's Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
It's Greg Abbott. Donald Trump says, "Hey, we want five." I'm running in one of these gerrymandered seats. Donald Trump this summer said, "I want 5 seats." He knows he can't win on issues, so he's got to steal the seats. Greg Abbott, our governor, salutes smartly and goes and gerrymanders and steals 5 seats. So I'm running the Texas ninth as my district. Is like ground zero for gerrymandering. It's
Well, if you
uh,
win it's going to anger Mr. Trump.
it'll be a punch in their nose. That's what I'm doing. Very much a national. It's only it's a local congressional seat, but it's a national problem. There and many of them are probably not. I mean, many of them are very tough. Um, there was another one that I was being recruited to run in where Kamala got 33%. Right, that's going to be a tough district to crack. The district I'm running in is a lean Republican, but Beto would have won it in 2018. So like this is a winnable district, and so I need to win it. We can't let them just steal because what California is doing, fighting back against what Texas did. That's not a victory. It's necessary, and you have to fight fire with fire. But in a nuclear war, and I did nukes when I was in F-16 pilot. I had the nuclear mission. I had a town actually that was my town. Learned everything about it, and I was going to go drop a B-61 gravity bomb on it had I been called to do so. But I knew if Russia dropped a bomb on us, I might be called to go drop a bomb on them. That's not a victory. It's necessary. Like you have to be able to do it. You have to have mutually assured destruction. But there's nobody wins a nuclear war. Nobody wins a gerrymandering war.
I mean, some of the folks that did public service are doing very well in politics. Abigail Spanberger is a friend,
Yeah.
former CIA officer, Alyssa
Yep.
Slotkin in Michigan,
Yep.
Mikey Sherrill, and they ran essentially 5 or 6 points above where Kamala Harris did. And
Right.
so you'd like to think in Texas there's a chance now with the way things are going. But and again, those of us who worked inside, I mean, I worked for Republican and Democratic presidents and very much did the same thing because we saw ourselves working for the American people. So, we almost don't want to be in a position where we're having to talk about 5 points this and 5 points that. We want to, try to say, I'm working for the people. Here's my policy and may the best policy win. But we're in a different time.
It's I've never seen anything like it. I don't, the country's never been through anything like what we're doing right now. And the Civil War, yeah, of course, it ended up in a war, but it was different. I think this is the most. that we've ever been in. And
That's why we need good people to run.
and by the way, this whole thing about manifest destiny and God has ordained that America be great, and no, that's not true. Like we've had a good run. We could lose it very quickly, and so we need, unless we keep, good people doing this. And here's an important point, and this is super important point. And here's something I want everybody to remember: our founding fathers were amazing. They made some huge mistakes. Slavery, 3/5 of a person. I think the Electoral College. They made some dumb things, but they gave us this incredible blessing of our system of government and checks and balances. They knew human nature. And our founding fathers anticipated Donald Trump. They knew that Donald Trump would come. They knew that there would be a man who wanted to be a king. And that's why they set up the checks and balances. What they didn't do, and this is another failure of the founding fathers, what they didn't anticipate was Mike Johnson. They never thought that the leader of the House of Congress would just submit to the president. They always assumed that he would want the best for Congress and he would be jealously guarding congressional power, and the courts would jealously guard, and they thought there would be this healthy tension. They anticipated Donald Trump. They did not anticipate Mike Johnson. That's why we're in such a bad place, because there are no checks and balances. There's none right now.
There's
Yeah.
also, this year's the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And so that's starting to get some attention because
Yeah.
the administration doesn't want museums and historians to talk about the ups and downs and the good and bad of that time. They want to put out an administration favorable view. But Ken Burns has a big show coming out, like he did for Civil War and Vietnam War on Revolutionary War. Rick Atkinson's wrote a bunch of big sort of books on the Revolutionary War, and Jill Lepore just wrote a great article in the New Yorker about this time. And the Revolutionary War, it's a really important time to go back and look about what did we fight for? How did this sort of this rabble of people fight against the biggest power on earth, overthrow a tyrant, overthrow a king? And so, I mean, it is a good time to look back at that period of time rather than just sort of cover it up. And so it's going to be interesting as we move forward.
A book right now called First Principles. I did a podcast called The Daily Stoic. It was really cool, and it's about how the Greeks and the Romans, how the ancients influenced the founding fathers. We kind of know, yeah, they were Christians and Christian nation and all that, but they were influenced by the Greeks and Romans a lot. That's how the George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, they were educated in Latin and in Greek. And so it's really interesting to read this. And one of the takeaway from this book is there's really two foundations for America. There's two principles the nation is founded on. All men are created equal, and power comes from the people, right? From the consent of the governed is those are kind of the two foundations of our country. And this administration that we have right now, all people aren't created equal. People with the last name of Trump and billionaires and in his little circle are the top caste, and everybody else is the bottom caste. And their power doesn't come from the people. They're trying to gerrymander the power away from the people. They're having politicians pick their voters, not voters pick their. But kind of the two foundations of America, all men are created equal and power comes from the people, are undermined badly. And that's a really bad place. This is why we need to start winning elections and stop this.
So many of us in the Steady State organization worked in national security and foreign affairs. You're running for office in Texas. Are there any issues just of the recent weeks from this administration related to foreign or military policy that resonate with Texas voters? Tariffs, immigration, striking boats in the Caribbean, Venezuela, I don't know, Ukraine, Nigeria. What
Yeah.
what are the things when you talk about national security that you focus on?
So to be perfectly honest, here's what matters to voters: healthcare. Every single time I've had any event with voters, the first thing that everybody talks about is healthcare. Prices are going up, the costs are going up. My own costs are going up. Healthcare matters a lot. Costs in general matter a lot. Um, Tariffs matter a lot. In my district, it's refineries, um, shipping. The Houston shipping channel is one of the biggest ports. Like, there's a lot of stuff that comes in and there's a lot of stuff that goes out. Texas says $900 billion a year in imports and exports as a state. And a lot of that comes through my district. And then the other thing, I have a lot of farmers, like I said, and ranchers, and tariffs matter to them a lot. Like losing the soybean market in China. And by the way, the chaos that Trump is creating causes long-term problems. And he might be able to get a deal that works this year, but in the long term, businesses require long-term stability. No business owner is going to invest serious money in any project unless he has long-term stability. What Trump has taught the world is you can't trust us. There is no whatever you think you're going to do now, there's no long-term stability. Whatever you think you're going to do now is going to change in the future. That trust has been undermined, and it's going to take a long time. What's the term? Build 1,000 bridges. I won't finish that, but trust is hard to gain and easy to break, and that's what's happened. And that's hurting my farmers. It's hurting my ranchers. I just read an article this morning that we're subsidizing Argentinian beef, and my cattle ranchers in my district it's going to hurt them.
And
So
the soybean stuff that the Chinese stopped buying from us here, the Argentinians are moving into that
yep,
area at the same time that we're subsidizing a politician because Trump likes
because he's
that he's
crazy right
friendly to
wing.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Brazil also, and China's agreeing to buy soybeans. Well, they've agreed to buy a lot less soybeans than they were buying before,
before exactly.
and they didn't exactly agree. They said they'll pay market price for something. So if the market price is not where they want, their agreement will allow them to not buy American soybeans. So Trump has really hurt farmers, and he's really hurt ranchers. Unfortunately, a
And,
lot of those
and he's
folks
helped
voted for
China.
Trump, and he's helped China. He's
Yeah.
helped. How much has he helped Russia?
Well, even today, I just was reading a couple things. The Pakistanis have figured out how to play him well, and so they've given money to him and said he put him up for a Nobel Peace Prize and everything. So he's like supporting Pakistan at the same time that they're cracking down on democracy there. They've made the army chief of staff immune from any prosecution ever for anything. And like I
Trump's
know,
trying to do right.
yeah, and so I
Trump's doing the
know
same thing.
foreign policy doesn't necessarily play on the local level for
Right.
politicians, but for Americans, at some point, they have to understand that those things actually do matter.
I try to look. You may not care about Ukraine, but get like my district is heavily Hispanic. A lot of those young men and women join the army and join the military. And if we don't get foreign policy right, they're gonna they're gonna have to go to war. That's the bottom line. And so the things that may seem like it's far away and don't matter, they actually matter very, very much to Texans' daily lives. You were a case officer, right?
Right?
I, so help me understand, if you were looking for somebody, if you needed to if you had a mark, if there was somebody that you wanted to get some information for, like what personality traits would they have, and what might make them vulnerable to you being able to recruit them? And might our president share some of those same traits? I'd like to hear hear
It's
that.
interesting. I'll
Yeah,
send you. I wrote an article on whether he would be a good source or not.
right,
And so, in terms of someone to recruit as a spy,
right,
you're looking for someone who has access to information that you can't get any other way, that we can't get through diplomats or spy satellites or
check,
whatever.
right,
But then you're looking for everyone's different. So you're looking
right,
for something in their personality that might make them willing to commit treason against their own country, because frankly, that's what they're doing. And usually there's a lot of reasons. Some people want money. Some people need health thing for kids. There's a variety if they hate their boss, they hate their country, but ego is the biggest by far. Is you play to somebody, you can play a much bigger role in the world stage by helping the Americans, while your country does things that you don't like and stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, so the Trump piece, if you want to get into it, yeah, he's easy to read, he's easy to play, but at the end of the day, for a spy, you want that spy to then follow your direction, to keep themselves safe, to keep it secret. And he's just would be awful. I can't imagine trying to control him and meet him on a corner somewhere to have him brief you on what's going on. Like he can't spit out more than 5 words that make any sense.
Hmm. It's just interesting. That was never my world, but yeah,
Crazy time.
it is. Yeah, makes my head explode sometimes seeing what's going on. The boxes, the classified boxes in the bathroom. Um, I was sure you were read into a lot more than I was, but I had I had clearances with code words. And when I saw just the cover letters that were posted in the press, I was literally, I had a violent, shaking reaction, like, oh my God, you can't have that stuff out. I remember as a pilot, if you had grid or something, like I knew where the paper was. I didn't let it out of my sight. I treated that classified stuff with respect, and to see boxes of this just in the Mar-a-Lago bathroom and hiding it from the FBI and actively hiding it and saying, well, yeah, we gave it all back, and lying like that was just.
Well, I'm glad you're running. It's good to see public servants who have a sense of service trying to get into the political arena. I think we've taken plenty of your time. And so before we leave, is there a way if people will either want to support you or follow you, how do they find you? What can they
Yeah.
do?
The easiest is my website, terryvirts.com, TerryVirts. There's a launch video on there. I did a short little video for me running for the House. There's donations. The money, John, sucks. It's one of the things that, but like, you have to have it. If I want a staff, unfortunately, my staff wants to get paid. These guys, I'm like, do you really need to get paid? They do. And I have a super small staff. There's only really one full-time guy and a couple others. But if I want to run ads, nobody's going to know anything about me unless I run ads. All that stuff costs money. The Republicans are hugely well financed. The amount of money they're raising already is insane. TerryVirts.com, folks can donate, and that's hugely appreciated. Also, follow me on social, Astro Terry, and like retweet things and post things, and that helps out a lot. And tell your friends about me. Text your friends and family and go, hey, there's this. If you like me, if not, yeah, forget about it. But anyway, those things are really helpful, especially early in the campaign. When this comes out, we're still a few months away from the primary and the generals next November 26th.
Very good. Thanks for your time then. We will let you know when this comes out, but thanks for what you're doing and what you have done. So
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the Sentinel and follow Steady State content. And give us a 5-star review on Google. Those reviews help us get this important content to the widest audience possible. Thanks. Stay informed, stay engaged, and join us next Tuesday for another episode of the Steady State Sentinel. This is John Cipher, still standing watch.
Thank you for listening to the Steady State Sentinel podcast. Don't miss out on more insights and exposés from America's premier global security experts.
Also, subscribe to our Substack at substack.com/@steadystate1 and follow our social media and join us right here next week for another exciting edition.
The Steady State is a nonprofit organization working to sustain our democracy and national security.
Join us and support our mission by visiting www.thesteadystate.org.